Consumer attitudes towards electric vehicles have changed a lot over the years. It wasn't that, maybe 3, 4 years ago that a typical EV buyer was a professional couple with a higher income, maybe an environmental uh, kind of worldview. But now EVs have become mainstream. I'm going to be talking to Peter Hatges about he's the national automotive sector leader for KPMG Canada, about a new poll they've got. So welcome to the interview, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, this is really interesting because essentially, well over 50%, according to your survey, of Canadians, they're not just thinking about buying an EV, they want to buy an EV.
Yeah, we were surprised at the results. 51% said they would never buy anything other than an electric vehicle again, and that is a big change, a big commitment on behalf of consumers. I think rising gas prices has been a factor. I think inflation is a factor, and you have to remember that you know uh, electric vehicles are fundamentally different than a combustion engine car in terms of maintenance. There's far more fewer moving parts. It's easier to maintain. It's cheaper to fuel, not necessarily easier. So people are motivated by both sides.
And what role have rising gas prices played in the change in people's perception of EVs?
I think it's a big catalyst. I think people see not just rising gas prices, but the volatility that goes with it, the unpredictability. And I think you've got all kinds of financial pressures depending on where you live in Canada. We've got inflation. We've got a extremely robust real estate market. So when families plan their monthly budgets, they've got mortgages to pay and they've got other expenses to deal with. And one more thing on top of a big load of books is very difficult to carry around. So I think there's a whole culmination of factors, including people wanting to be responsible to the environment and hopefully reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But we all know the source of electricity is just as important as how you use it in your car.
It's fascinating to me to watch the change in attitudes, the pace at which those attitudes change. And, I've been studying the adoption of new technologies for, since my graduate school in the mid 80s. And it used to be much slower. And it seems like the flow of information, accessibility or access to information has a lot to do with changing people's perception of EVs as a viable technology. Would you agree with that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I'll tell you what the motivating factor there is. The big three, GM, Chrysler, Fiat Chrysler, and Ford are committing to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion in the next 2 to 3 years on the electrification of vehicles. So there's a lot of plant and capital expenditures going on. You bet they're going to educate the consumer and their customers. They want them to be very aware of what's coming because it's an irreversible change for them. And the auto industry is very accustomed to building products on an efficient basis, on an economies of scale basis. And once they build them very quickly and en masse.
I've argued in columns that the consumer for oil, and we're talking, of course, oil becomes fuel for gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, but the consumer for oil is in fact not you and me, the person who pulls up to the pump to fuel up their internal combustion engine vehicle. It's the automakers. The automakers determine what kind of fuel is going to be used in the vehicle, and the automakers have clearly said we prefer electric. And now they're speaking with their wallet and with their marketing, and that to me has been a big shift. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's a very big shift, and I think there's a significant emphasis on meeting consumer requirements. The auto industry is very good at understanding what its customers want, and they have learned to become very profitable. Every single major OEM has been experienced profitability before interest and taxes last year, including Tesla. Their shareholders are accustomed to earning a return on their capital, so they are going to meet the requirements of their customers. The big issue facing them is you are going to have early adopters, but if you want a broad range of adoption, the issue you're going to be faced with is North Americans are extremely accustomed to not planning their trips. They go out there, they fill their vehicle up with fuel, gas. It takes 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. That's what they're accustomed to. If you were to ask, and we've had respondents to our various polls, how long would you wait? No one's waiting 20 minutes at a gas station. They don't want to do it. Now, there's going to be people who, can manage this because they'll charge up their car at home overnight. They won't worry about it, or they'll plan their trips accordingly. My own view is that technology gap, that expectation gap will be met by the OEMs, and they're going to work hard to do it. You will see an evolution in battery technology, and maybe the lithium ion battery will be replaced by fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells. We don't know, but I think there's going to be a lot of progression in that regard.
Yeah, that's something that's really important, is that when new technologies are adopted, we're sort of at the heel of the curve. We're still beginning exponential growth, and we're getting into the early majority adopters, and it's becoming more mainstream. But the technology is only going to get better, and what that does is just speed up the pace of adoption. It gets better, it gets cheaper, and you can look down the future, into the future. I've interviewed battery experts. Battery costs are coming down, energy density is going up, so range is going to be better. The OEMs are figuring out how to get 80%, from 10 to 80% of a charge in 18 minutes, those sorts of things. Would you agree that all of that feeds into the perception of by consumers that this is a technology that they can actually use on a daily basis?
I think it weighs very heavily on the broad range of consumers for automobiles. I think what you're going to find is early adopters will purchase an electric vehicle if it suits their drivability requirements, or in a two-car family, it'll be the second car. In my view, they won't have a high degree of reliance on needing to fuel it if they still have range anxiety or charging anxiety, if you call it that. So the second car does things around town where they can manage the chargeability and rechargeability of that battery. And I think that's how it's going to play out. The other thing is, and I think you've raised a very good point, in North America, if you include Canada and the United States, let's confine it to that. In terms of registered vehicles, there's probably something in the range of 270 to 280 million registered vehicles, depending on how you measure them. That includes trucks, that includes motorcycles, that includes cars. It's going to take a heck of a long time to replace all those internal combustion engines with electrically charged engines, powertrains, if you will. And so, as that progression takes place, and remember, the average life of a vehicle is about 11 years right now. Technology will catch up. We've had lots of experience with computers and personal cell phones to know that there are massive and significant improvements over a decade. And, we're going to have at least a decade to start replacing all these vehicles. We don't build enough in a year to replace that many vehicles. That's just not possible. So it'll take time. And I think there'll be concurrency.
Now, one of the things that I noticed in your survey is that there's a bit of a difference between age groups. So the younger consumers are more willing to buy an electric vehicle than maybe the older ones. But the older, like sort of 50 plus consumers, they're pretty EV friendly as well.
Yeah, they're catching up. I think the biggest issue has been historically, if you go back 3 or 4 years with electric vehicles, the cost of them. The average purchase price of a vehicle in Canada, it doesn't matter what the demographics are. It's not $100,000, for example, where some of the more exotic electric cars have landed. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to find that equilibrium, and the OEMs have to get that the economies of scale moving so they can appeal to everybody. Younger people, maybe they don't have the financial responsibilities and obligations of a 50-year-old couple or a 40-year-old couple that might have children in school and university and all those kinds of financial challenges. So I think attitudes are changing, one, because of price, two, because of awareness. Awareness is a big issue. And three, it'll largely depend too on availability. I think in the past, we haven't had a lot of availability. North American customers for cars are very accustomed to a lot of choice. People want SUVs, passenger cars, or small cars, or big cars, or trucks. And they haul around a lot of stuff in trucks. And batteries have to be good at doing that. They have to be good at responding to our weather. So there's a lot of considerations in the future.
What about differences between regions within Canada? I guess we shouldn't be surprised that BC and Quebec, for instance, would be more willing, consumers there would be more willing than, say, on the prairies to buy an electric vehicle.
Yeah, they have been. That's kind of what the stats show, that people in BC and Quebec, of course, has a lot of cheap electrical energy and a good producer of it. And they're big promoters of it because, they're looking for the spin-off from hopefully from the industry and the auto industry as it starts building vehicles in a different way. They want to capture some of that market. So, incentives have played a part, although I will tell you, I think incentives should be really redirected into infrastructure. That would be money better spent. Incentive cause regional disparities that ultimately will disappear when markets normalize, and all of a sudden now you've got different dynamics at play. I don't think it does anybody any good to encourage people in that way. I'm a strong believer in having infrastructure dollars being spent where they're needed most.
Yeah, according to what I've read, the average purchase price, car purchase price now in Canada is about $45,000, and you're seeing plenty of EVs like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 be introduced at that market, at that level. So purchase price,
Yeah.
and this is reflected in other surveys that I've seen, purchase price is now not the number one obstacle to adoption. That would be public charging infrastructure, range anxiety. And so I think that data bears out what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of purchasers use credit to buy a vehicle. Credit is readily available, at least it is now. So that's a big catalyst as well. So you're right. I think it's charging infrastructure. I really think for people that still have that anxiety, to them, you know, we've made our surveys indicate people still expect to charge or to refuel in 5 to 7 minutes. And you know what? It's a tall order. We're not there yet for electric batteries. That's
Well, Peter, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.